Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Kenichi, and welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. And tonight is part two of our interview with one of the greatest athletes ever to step foot in Derby High School, Dave Anroman. And Dave, I want to thank you for coming on again. Part one was a lot of fun, and I know we're going to have a blast part two, so thank you again.
Thanks, Mike.
So, Dave, let's get right into it. The 92 season begins with captain's practice in the summer. So many question marks about that team. You know, I could think of guys like Rick Kovacs and Claudio Mendez. You know, they were going to have to start that year because it was a young team. And I think there were only, 9 seniors on the team that year?
Yeah, there was 9 seniors. A couple guys got hurt, didn't even make it through the season. Greg Maliska was out early during the summer. He never even played. Rich Belazzi never even played football.
Right.
But yeah, we were definitely short in numbers that year. So we needed a lot of the sophomores and juniors to really step up that year, in which they did. I mean, we expected a lot from them right out of the gates, and fortunate for us, they did very well that year.
Right, Dave. We talked about it in part one a little bit. Nobody knew who the quarterback was going to be. Coach DeCenzo had 2 young kids he was trying out, and Chris Ruther and Steve Tilkey. But I think his backup plan was, if they're not ready, David's going to be the quarterback. Let me ask you, did you have any conversation with him? Did you express to him that you really didn't want to be quarterback, that you thought you could do better with you as running back with the team?
We did. We spoke a few times. The contingency was that I was going to play quarterback. Then we flirted with the idea, if we were going to throw the ball, I would come in as quarterback. But then it would be too one-dimensional.
And teams would pick up on it.
They would pick up on it. So, I mean, we tried every different scenario to try to work me in there. I think at the end of the day, we both decided it would be best if I would be put at running back. At least I was able to come out of the backfield and catch the ball or line up at receiver, but then we just needed someone to throw it. So that's where Coach DeCenzo spent a lot of time with both quarterbacks, and I did as well to try to help him. Because I played quarterback for 5 years.
Right.
So through the Pop Warner years, and I just felt before we got into the season, we had 5 scrimmages and we rotated. We were trying to find our niche, and I just felt before the season, Coach DeCenzo still was undecided, and I just felt, as the captain and as leader of the team, that we needed to make a decision. Who are we going to go with and who we're going to ride with? So he let it up to me to make the decision. So that's when I finally decided that Steve Tilkey would be our starting quarterback.
Right.
Nothing against the other quarterbacks that we tried out, but we just needed to stick with one.
Right.
And we just needed to build a nucleus around that. And it took a few weeks, but I think it served its purpose, and I think it worked out well. Steve did a tremendous job that year. As the season progressed, he got better each and every day, and that's the most you could expect out of someone who's, especially a sophomore.
Right.
To get thrusted into that, and not to mention he was thrusted into a time where we just came off a losing season.
Right.
They were expecting us to win 2 games. We were projected to be second to last in the league.
Right. I think everybody was looking ahead to the 93 team.
They were looking ahead, as maybe this would be a year of all these guys get the experience, so then the following year they would get back, to winning a state title. And in the scrimmages, usually we would win all 5 scrimmages. I think we only won 1 scrimmage, which was our last scrimmage.
Right.
So it was nerve-wracking. It was concerning, and the confidence wasn't there.
Right.
And now you're looking as you're the captain of this team, and you can kind of see everyone's looking around saying, okay, we need something, and that's when, I say it all the time, Coach DeCenzo bringing in Ron Leno that year, I think was the best thing that happened to our football team.
I think the team needed some youth.
Yeah, and he brought that youth. I mean, right off the bat. I mean, I already knew who he was. He played on the '83 team. Obviously, we knew he was a captain.
Right.
He went on to play at Central. I mean, his resume spoke for itself. And when he came in, he was ready. And what Coach DeCenzo did, which was great, was he brought him in as our special teams coach. And he revamped our whole special teams where it made it actually fun.
Right.
And we scored a lot and we set up a lot of touchdowns just by that alone. So, I mean, I owe a lot to him. I tell him all the time, you know, without him there that year, nothing against the other coaches. They're great coaches, but we needed something, and he brought that motivation and that intensity to a whole nother level.
Well, I really believe with him, too, is you wouldn't have got what you got out of Rick Kovacs and Claudio Mendez without him, because he made them think, and he did.
He did.
He believed in them.
He did.
Where they probably didn't have that before, and now they had this guy who says, listen, you're going to be all Hoosie, or you're going to be all Valley, whatever the case may be. He worked with them every day and pushed them, and I don't think you get a good season out of them like you did without him there.
He did, you know, and Ron was very intense. You know, he was going to get the most out of your talent. You know, whether it was a little or a lot, he was going to exhaust every ounce of your talent that you had and what you had to offer. You know, and that's a testament to his character. You know, and Ron's still coaching today. He's been coaching for over 30 years.
Right.
He's a great coach. I consider him a close friend, even though I don't speak to him as much anymore. But, you know, I love him, and for what the contributions he put into that team that year, it's you know, I owe him a lot. You know.
Right. And, you know, a lot of people say the same thing about him. You know, he's been good to me, too. One of the things, Dave, that was different that you did as a captain, and, you know, I didn't see past teams, so I don't know what they did, but a lot of times when underclassmen come in, the seniors and the captains, they like to razz them a little bit, you know, give them a hard time.
Sure.
You took a different approach. Your attitude was, I'm only going to give you a hard time if you miss practice, if you're not giving 100%. But once the team got in the locker room, you didn't bother anybody as far as you weren't going to bully them or anything like that. You took like an approach that the whole team has to be a team. And if not everybody's on the same page and they're not all together, it's not going to work. Talk about just you as a captain, what you brought to that.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, coming into that season, all that nonsense needed to be put aside. We needed a total team effort if we were going to compete. I mean, to be honest with you, coming into that season, you know, it was in, you know, further down the trough, but, you know, I wanted to win every game, you know, and the only way to do that is to have everyone on the same page. And if you're sitting there, if you're hazing, or if you're putting kids down, or if you're making them carry your pads, or, you know, all this other nonsense, you're not focused on winning.
Right.
You know, and that's what we needed. And I sat down with the seniors, even some of the juniors. They tried to do some of that early on, and it was not going to happen, not under my watch. And we needed everybody on that field to be on the same page and to focus on winning. And not just in the varsity. I'm talking all the way down the line through the JV game down to the freshman game.
And, you know, one thing I really remember, too, you know, you were talking about carrying the pads and stuff that you put a stop to. You caught one of the juniors one year having some kid put his pads inside his pants for him. He didn't feel like doing it. And when you got wind of it, you took the pants from the kid and you told the junior, put your own pads on. That's how we do things here. We don't, you know, make somebody else do that. Yeah. And I really think, like, the underclassmen, they started to feel comfortable that they were a part of this team, where sometimes you don't, as a sophomore, you feel like, you know, you're going to be like the forgotten person, or, you know, you're going to be the one that everybody picks on. You made that entire team feel like a team.
Absolutely. You know, we needed to be one unit. You know, and I was there. You know, I remember being a freshman, and, you know, I was hazed by some of the seniors that year. But, you know, some of those teams were a lot better. They can afford to, you know, maybe screw around and fool around and maybe do a little hazing. They didn't care if a guy, you know, quit the team. You know, we didn't have that luxury. Right. You know, and nor was I, you know, I was a fan of it. You know, I just felt, you know, as a team, everyone needed to be on the same page. You know, if again, if a couple guys maybe were straying away, maybe didn't want to play, wanted to quit, it would hurt us as a whole. Right. You know, and that's something that I would not accept, especially all the time I put in, you know, the previous 2 years, and especially what I went through the previous year. I was not going to let that happen, you know, and I'm just glad that everything worked out in the end, you know, in that regard.
Right. So let's talk about the team a little bit. Charlie took a gamble. He moved George Hay from guard to tight end. And, you know, at the time, I don't think anybody knew what kind of tight end he could be. Maybe he could be a good blocker, but he'd never been a receiver, so you don't know how he's going to do as a tight end. I mean, look at the season he had. He had a great season. I think he scored at least 4 touchdowns. Then there was Dave Bizzato. You know, I think Charlie was flirting a little bit with maybe putting Mike Paquet at fullback. They were both switching times. You look at what Bizzato did. You know, but there were so many what-ifs on that team. You know, Dimitri Anufriavis, he had to be the nose tackle, I believe. He was a first-year starter. Mike Massey was, you know, Massey got playing time as a junior when Ben went down. But Massey was going to be a two-way starter on the team. You know, really his first taste of going both ways. You and I want to say you, George, and Sean were really the only three that had a lot of varsity experience. So, I mean, just talk about how did it all come together? What do you think was the big difference? Do you just think these kids worked so hard in practice that made it happen?
Yeah, you know, we had a couple meetings where we sat down probably right before the season. You know, after we lost a couple scrimmages, you know, we were getting a lot of feedback from the fans, you know, our parents, you know, just pretty much saying, you know, this is not it. You know, I don't see you guys winning more than 2 or 3 games, you know. Right. And so we finally just sat down and said, you know, the only way this is going to work is if we come together now. We're going to have to step up, you know, anything we can do to make it, we have to go 110% every play.
Right.
And I felt that we all put the time in during the off season. We felt we could do it. Right. You know, we didn't know how we were going to do it, but we knew that we had something special within the guys that we had. And then a lot of the underclassmen, you know, we didn't force them to come. They came along. I think they felt, you know, a lot of the juniors that were on that team, you know, with Angelo DeRuba, Adam Saylor, Eddie McManus, you know, you know, Jeff Robinson, a lot of those guys, Joe Cabral,
Mike Pocket.
Didn't have to, and Mike Pocket, didn't have to ask those guys. Those guys just came.
Right.
You know, so I think they seen what had happened. They knew the sense of urgency we had coming into the '92 season, and they were on board. You know, so it wasn't just the seniors, that it was a total collective unit that we had, and I just felt that after the Amity game, that the first game of the season, I realized, okay, now I think we're on our way of getting better to being a contender in the Housatonic League and possibly getting to the state championship game again.
Right, and you know, you talked about the Amity game. I think you guys win 34-10 that day. You know, great game. You had a tremendous game, player of the game. Tough overtime loss to Sheehan. You know, basically what happened in that game is, you know, Sheehan had a talented player in John Gers who was tremendous that year, and he did a great job with, you know, blocking the ends. They were able to get to that outside a lot. Tough overtime loss. You go into play Cheshire, and it looks like Cheshire's burying everybody. They killed Seymour the previous week. They got Kyle McIntosh. You know, they got so many talented players. You guys almost pull off the upset. But what I always remember about that game is where the coaching staff was so proud of everybody, they thought it was a victory. You were sitting in the locker room crying like crazy. You were so devastated by that loss. And I remember hearing you say, I'm sick of losing. And, I mean, just talk about how tough those first 3 games were.
Yeah, I mean, you know, after beating Amity, you know, we were confident, you know, in the Sheehan game. We knew they were predicted to win the league along with Lyman Hall. I mean, Cheshire was up there. I mean, those 3 were the top 3 teams, not to mention Brantford. I mean, there was 3 teams in the top 10 in our league. Sheehan was just on the cusp of turning their program around, and they had a great football team. We had that game won. We were up 14-60, scored late.
Right.
We went to overtime. They scored. We scored, but they said they called it back. We stepped over the line. We watched the film 100 times. We didn't.
Right.
But, you know, it's part of football. It happens. So we lost that game. And then, you know, the Cheshire game, we had that game won. We were going in for the winning touchdown, and we fumbled the ball out of the end zone. It just didn't work out. But, you know, after losing that game, now we're 1-2.
Right.
You know, you're looking now.
And you lose Mike Massey the second game of the year.
Forgot about that.
People forget about that.
Yeah.
You know, that was a huge loss.
We lose him. Now he's our top receiver. He was our safety. You know, Mike and I complement each other because we always played the wide side. You know, we were able. No one was going to get past us. Now we lose him. You know, now we got to shift our defensive backfield around. So losing him hurt, and especially losing the game. And now we got to come back and play the #1 team in the state, in Cheshire, and. You know, losing that game, heartbreaking loss again, which we should have won and we lost. Now being 1-2, it's, you know, that's when I would say that game was probably the turning point.
Right.
Saying, you know, that's it, we're done, we're going to run the table from here on out. and we were, very close in doing so. A lot of the underclassmen really stepped up after that.
Right, and you talk about underclassmen, as you mentioned, Joe Cabral, he had to step in and fill in for Massey.
Yeah.
You talk about Joe Leza, he played guard that year. You talk about Eddie McManus playing defensive end as a junior. Another kid is Ken Cronk. He had a good year as a receiver.
He had to step in when Mike Massey got hurt.
But I really believe that those kids wouldn't have done as well without the leadership of you, Sean, George, and even the other seniors on the team, because the other guys bought into it.
Sure.
And they, did whatever you guys asked. Let me ask you this, Dave, as far as the coaching staff goes. You mentioned Barry McDermott. You went home, you cried a lot. Frank Alley was a very demanding guy, and you dealt with him because he was your defensive back coach. But let me ask you, how much did he mean to you as a player? Because you had a phenomenal year on defense. Your offense speaks for itself, but defensively that year you were tremendous.
Yeah, Frank and I got along very well. He simplified the defense, especially after when Mike went down. And, he kind of, he brought me to the side and was like, I understand, we expect you a lot from offense. He goes, but now we need you more defensively than ever. Which, was humbling, but in another coin of it, it's like, okay, well, now I got to give more to the defense when I'm giving everything I have on the offensive side. But, we worked it out well where, he had a lot of confidence in me, and I was able, and that springboarded, to giving that confidence to the other, defensive backs, Dave Bizzato. Now you had Joe Cabral, who wasn't a starter. Now he was thrust into playing a lot of minutes. And it worked out well. Frank was a great defensive mind. Fortunate enough to have him in that position at that time because we needed him. This was another coach that was also thinking about stepping down after his wife had just died.
Right.
But he felt an obligation. I think he knew the urgency of not letting the program slip as much as it did after reaching the highest point, the highest pinnacle you can achieve in any sport, and then watching it fall as it did, and I was thankful to have him come back, and I was going to give everything I had, for him and for Coach DeCenzo for coming back, especially as you talked about as he became the principal. We didn't know he was going to come back, but it all worked out in the end, and it was a special season. It really was.
The East Haven game, Dave, first half, Derby struggling. East Haven was right in the game. I think you guys might only have been ahead by a touchdown. And it just looked like, God, you can't seem to get over that hump.
No.
It's becoming such a problem. But the second half, you guys really took off. And you could just feel relief after that game. Everybody was celebrating because you knew how hard it's been to win. And to get that win, especially against a team you think you're going to beat, and they're hanging in the game, and then you guys pull away. I think that game was a big turning point in the season.
I believe so. They had a first half. I think we were up like 14-12. I remember. East Haven was a good team. They just came off beating Seymour for the first time in 12 years.
Right.
So they were riding high. They came into that game expecting to win. That game was canceled. We were playing on a Saturday night at like 8 o'clock. I remember the one thing I remember that season. The bus didn't show up.
Yes, it was late.
It was late. Coach DeCenzo was calling Kenny Marcuccio, and back then there was no cell phones, so we're calling on the pay phone. We ran out of change, ran out of money. We couldn't. Then finally, the bus shows up. We get on the bus. We're probably halfway there. I'm hearing in the front that we're going to run out of gas. So Charlie turns around and says, says to Coach DeFrancisco, D, do you got any money? He goes, the only day I didn't bring my wallet. I got no money. No one brought any money with them. So we didn't even think we were going to make it to the game. Right. So I told, pretty much the team, get all your pads, put everything on. We're going to have to run to the field. And people thought we were joking, but the bus driver wasn't.
Right.
But I remember that, but we got to the game, thank God, and we pulled off a win.
Right. Now let's talk about a game that, to me, was the Dave Anroman show, and that was that Seymour game. You scored 5 touchdowns that day. Dave Bizzato had a great game as well. I think he was close to over 160 yards rushing, and he had a big interception return. But just talk about that game, Dave, because Seymour had just come off a big win against Shelton. Yeah. They were fired up, and the first half was a little scary. Derby led at the half, but second half the team just took off, and I mean, you were just doing whatever you wanted that day. Talk about that game and how special that game was.
Yeah, that was very special. I think it was personal for me because the year before we had that game won. Right. And for them to celebrate on our field like that, and I took it personal,
Right.
you know, and now we had to repay the favor, and we went into Seymour that day, and you know, things opened up very well. You know, if Dave didn't have such a good game, Bizzato up the middle, it wouldn't have freed me as much running on the outside.
Right.
But defensively, we played well. You know, this was a team that was putting up probably you know, 28 to 35 points a game.
Right.
You know, and we held them, I think, to 19
right.
that day.
46-19.
Right. But you know, offensively, that's when we finally clicked. I think that gave us the most confidence, especially, you know, the following week we were going into the Ansonia game, and I think that game, I think, catapulted us. That really brought us all together. I think everyone on that team had enough confidence saying, okay, I think we can run the table. When 2 weeks prior, we were saying, we don't think we're going to win another game.
Right.
You know, so it's, you know, it's coaching, you know, and also, you know, the guys on the team. You know,
Right.
we had a lot of great players that bought in to what we were trying to sell, and you know, I'm fortunate enough that I'm glad they listened. Because, you know, when you can only yell and say this is what we're going to do, but you need to put it into action for people to believe in you.
Right.
You know, and I think that day, I think people realized that, okay, these guys are serious and we're looking to win every game and possibly get back and play for a state championship.
Right. And, you know, I remember it was very classy of Coach Sponheimer, because the next day in the paper he said, Dave Anroman is a great player. I admire what he did today. You know, so it had to be a good feeling when you hear the opposition, especially, you know, Sponheimer, because he's intense and he doesn't like to lose. So to give somebody credit in a loss like that, you know, that had to be tremendous. Yeah,
Coach Sponheimer, great coach. You know, even outside of football, you know, just a great guy, great man. You know, another one of his assistants that he had was Steve Tracy.
Yeah.
He was close with our family. You know, I was good friends with their sons, you know, Jason and Eric. You know, he's always helped. I mean, even though he was a part of the Seymour program, you know, outside of us playing them, I mean, they rooted for us too. And I rooted for them as well. You know, any Valley school playing outside, playing each other, you always root for them. And you know, I was fortunate enough to know them and be friends with the Tracy family and good people and respect them and respect their program as well.
Right. Let's talk about Ansonia, Dave. It was a tough loss, an 8-0 loss. You know, recently I had talked to Mike Mahalsick. You know, I had seen him, and he was talking about how he played in one of the best Derby Ansonia games ever, '92. One of the things he said to me is David Anroman had the game of his life that day. I think he made every tackle. Tough loss, but I mean, years later, and you hear somebody like that say that about you, that has to be a great feeling to know that, you know, they respected what you did on the field. You know, and he said the kid played the game of his life. But talk about that Ansonia game a little bit. You know, there were so many. It was like 3 plays won that game for Ansonia, if you think about it, because you know, not getting the touchdown at the 5-yard line. You know, it was like a weird play. It was like Ansonia batted the ball and it went right into Jason Sharkey's hand. Then there was a tough drop ball and then an interception. Talk about that game and just what do you think happened that day?
You know, it's the thing about football is, you know, you can win in every aspect of the game. You can control the game, you control the clock, control them defensively, but then you lose the one most important, the scoreboard.
Yeah.
You know, if you play the game of football long enough, you know that eventually you talk to any great player, eventually that's going to happen to you. Right. And it's how you deal with it. That's going to make you a better person. It's going to make you not just throughout a season, throughout the rest of your life. You know, you look at that game, and we felt that before when we lost to Sheen and Cheshire. Both of those games, we had chances to win and just couldn't. And it had to do a little bit with maybe confidence at the time, you know, maybe inexperience. But in the Ansonia game, you know, you look back and you say, okay, well, we brought it down to the 4-yard line. You know, I caught a pass, ran 30, 35 yards down to the 4. You know, we ran a rollout play. Maybe Tilke should have thrown a little bit sooner, but he didn't. It gets bad and intercepted. We still stop him. You know, we didn't, you know, we didn't break, you know, but, you know, then they score on a couple, and that one play, you know, and then we come back after they score.
Right.
You know, we have a wide open receiver, you know, he drops the ball.
Right.
You know, and then the same thing with an interception. If the kid catches I'm not going to bring up his name, but if he catches the interception, he can walk in the end zone. We could have scored it easily 3 touchdowns that game. You know, so, but again, against a good football team, a great program as Sonia has, you can't make those mistakes.
Right.
It will cost you dearly, and it did. Unfortunately, it did that day. But I look back, and I say, I can honestly say that everything I did, I wouldn't take away anything that I did that day. I mean, I gave everything I had.
And Mahosik is 100% right, because you were making every tackle that day. And one of the things, Dave, and I look back and I watch it sometimes. At the end of that game, Jason Tinney comes up to you and you two embrace, and you could just tell that he respected what you brought to Derby and you respected what he brought to Ansonia, because there was a rivalry, because you were both great running backs, both great defensive backs. At the end of the game, here you are, you're heartbroken. You just lost, to Ansonia, but you still had enough decency to go up to him and give him a hug. Just talk about that a little bit. I mean, talk about the rivalry with him a little bit.
Yeah, there was, because we played against each other since Pop Warner. Jason was another player that went through the whole system. So I played against him, like 7 or 8 times. And that was probably the culmination of all those years playing against him and Jeff Press and Craig Soldra, all those guys, and Dave Pacheco. I mean, I'm friends with those guys today. I'm friends with Dave Pacheco. I see him all the time, and there's a mutual respect there. And like I said, great guys. They were, they had a great team, and I think at the end of that game, we both showed our respect. Same thing with Coach Hunt. He came up to me and we spoke for a few minutes along with Coach Sponheimer.
Right.
It's just saying it's unfortunate that that's what happens in this game is, you guys dominated us, and, unfortunately we capitalized on a few plays, and but it's part of the game. What the one thing that I can take on that is we could have easily folded after that game. Listen, I was devastated, as was the whole football team, because we knew, even the coaching staff knew, when we watched the film, it was sickening because we dominated that football game.
Right.
And we just couldn't, we just didn't make the plays, and they did. And it was no disrespect to that football team, but, you look back and you watch that film and you know who won that game.
Right.
But we just didn't win on the scoreboard.
And again, we won't mention the player's name, but that player who dropped that pass, one of the things you did after the game, you're mad now, your team just got beat. You had the decency to pat him on the back and said, don't worry about it. The season isn't over yet. You got plenty of time. And I think that's what speaks about you, because you were devastated, but you knew if you quit on these guys, they were going to quit. Absolutely. And you knew, again, it's one game. You guys are trying to get back to a winning season, trying to be good, So I thought that spoke a lot about you. Talk about, Dave, the North Haven game. That was a struggle for a while, but you guys pulled it out. Did you feel like after that game you guys could run the table?
I did. After the North Haven game, we got over the hump. That was a game that,
I think it was 30-21, something like that.
That was pretty much the last streak that could have been lost. And, as much as we tried to downplay it, to me it was everything at that point.
Well, you don't want to be the team that loses to them.
No, I mean, I was already a part of the first losing season in 26 years. Now we're going to lose to North Haven. And I was like unacceptable. And now to come back as we did, I give the underclassmen and the rest of the seniors on that team a lot of credit, because after losing a heartbreaker like that, in front of 12,000 people the week before, and now to come back and now you got to play a North Haven team who's pretty good, and in their house, and they're upset because they should have won the games in 1990 and the previous in '89. They were looking for payback, and they knew, and they probably, and I talked to Craig Guest, I became friends with him, years later, who was the captain of that North Haven team, and they said they smelled blood in the water. They were looking to beat us, and they came out and scored on the first drive. So.
And you guys also had a coach on that staff that was from North Haven.
Yeah, Tony Lisbello.
That was motivating them as well, because they felt like he was a traitor.
Traitor,
So I mean, there were a lot of elements, but you guys win that game, and then Dave, the Lyman Hall game, you and Steve Tilkey had two of the best games I've ever seen. He had a record set in passing day, and you had a record set in receiving day as well.
Yeah.
Talk about that game, because Dave, one of the best feelings in the world, I'm sure, You guys win that game, so it's going to assure a 500 season. You guys get to the locker room. Coach DeCenzo comes upstairs, and he writes on the board, winners again. Talk about that Lyman Hall game and what that felt like.
Yeah, because Lyman Hall came in that season as one of the top teams to probably...
And they hated Derby.
Yeah, and they beat us the previous year, and then before that was like 7 or 8 years before they beat us. But now, this was a team that was racked with injuries early on in the season.
Right.
This was a team that was supposed to possibly win the Hoosie, possibly along with Cheshire and Brantford. There was those 3 teams, and now Sheehan too. Like I said, those 3 teams were in the top 10 in the preseason. So Lyman Hall lost like 4 or 5 of their best players, but now they're all back.
Right.
They came back the week before against East Haven. They beat East Haven that week before 56-0 when we barely beat East Haven.
Right.
And they came out, I think, that first series and scored in like 2 plays, and I'm like, here we go again, And that was a really tough game, but yeah, Steve Tilke and I, we clicked. I think, midway through the season, they were starting to shut down our running game a little bit, and Coach Senzo said, now we're going to start splitting you out and start trying to put you one-on-one with receivers. That was like the first game. We were like, all right, David, we're going to split you out and see what you can do against their defensive backfield, which I had to go against this kid, Scott Anderson, who was All-State at defensive back the year before.
Right.
And yeah, Steve and I think I had 180 yards receiving the first half that game and 3 touchdowns. So yeah, Steve, great game throwing the ball. And in the second half, we kind of slowed down, but we were able to hold on to that win.
Right.
And yeah, that was special. I think maybe going back in the locker room now that you mentioned that, I remember Coach DeCenzo was pleased that we got that out of the way.
Right.
Of going 500, but I didn't feel comfortable, like, okay, well, now if we just go 5-5.
No, you didn't want that, right?
No, we wanted, at that point, we were like, we're going to win out. But we knew we were playing Brantford the following week that just played Cheshire into a triple overtime game.
Yeah.
They were undefeated, but they lost that game.
Right.
So now they're coming into our house, and now the previous year, they should have beat us, and we beat them. And, they had a great team, which I never beat.
Right.
I lost them my freshman year like 35-0. I mean, they were a good Brantford team. They had a couple All-Staters on there, and again, they were in the top 10, and they just lost to the number 1 team in triple overtime, which they should have won.
Right.
So yeah, it was that was another intense game that we barely squeaked by. There was never a time to relax.
Right.
That's one thing I can say.
But I think, Dave, that made the wins that much more special.
Yes.
Because they were so hard to get. And you guys had just went ahead 21-14 in the overtime, and they come right back and score.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, first play, and you're thinking, here we go.
Yeah, here we go.
And then Daruba blocks the extra point. And you guys win. And, the thing of it is, though, you saw so many people that you never saw show emotion. Rick Kovacs was crying. Claudio Mendez was crying. Guys that were very quiet. They didn't really, have that emotion. And especially Coach DeCenzo. I mean, he walked into that locker room, and then, the negative about it is his father passed away that night as well. So it was like such an emotional game, that whole, you could write a book about that game. I mean, talk about that emotional win, and it was your final game at Ryan Field.
Yeah, it was the final game. They had a senior class of like 35 players. They had 2 All-Staters. I remember Mike Tracy. I mean, he shadowed me the whole game. He was another great player. Started 3 years at Southern. It was a close all the way through. They were shutting our run down, but luckily I was able to throw a halfback pass touchdown
to Kenny Cronk.
To Kenny Cronk. Then the overtime game, people forget, we scored a touchdown. They called it back.
Yeah.
And then we ran another pass play. I called one in the corner of the end zone to go up by 7. I was like, all right, now all we got to do is stop them. Well, their first play, they scored.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here we go. Now they were going to get the ball first. I'm like, now if they go and score, are we going to have enough gumption to come back and tie the game? I was like, but thank God we blocked it.
Yeah.
Thank God we blocked the extra point.
And if you remember that game, too, they scored on the first play of the game.
Yeah, they scored, yeah.
Yeah, first play of the game. So, I mean, again, you guys seem to bend a lot but never broke,
right,
and it was just a great win. One of the things, Dave, I talked about, Coach DeCenzo's father passed. I think it was you, Dave Bazzato, might have been Sean Bittman. You guys went to his house after that game, and you knew he was hurt, and you just came to pay your condolences. And the class act that he is, his father just passes away. He says, listen, you guys played hard tonight. Let's watch the game. Yeah, I thought that was really something about it.
Yeah, it was. It was. Wasn't expecting that. you know, we pretty much, we watched the whole film, and he went over the things that we did wrong, which was just typical Charlie, and, you know, being a coach, great coach that he was. And then we talked about, you know, Shelton, and I said to him, I was like, you know, with every, you know, all the trials and tribulations that we've experienced this year, everything from the question marks of who's going to play where, how, you know, how are we going to fare playing all these great teams? You know, we played 5 top 10 teams that year out of 10 games, and then, you know, Coach Allo losing his wife, and then now you're losing your father. I said, we're dedicating these games, you know, to you guys, and he was dead set against that from the beginning. He says, this is your team. He goes, you're not going to dedicate it to me. You know, you guys are going to finish this off, you know, next week against Shelton, and to pay them back for what they did on our field the previous year. Right. You know, because Coach Asenzo said that. You know, my junior year was late in the game. They counted us out. And I ran for like an 80-yard touchdown. I remember coming off the field and Charlie saying, remember this for next year. Right. And that's what we talked about. We locked eyes and said, you know, remember what happened last year. And, you know, we did, and we were fortunate enough to win that game as well. Right.
You know, going into the Shelton game, it gets canceled on Thanksgiving. Frank Alou had planned to meet his family. You know, they lived out of state or whatever. Right. He wasn't going to go. Coach DeCenzo said, Frank, you need to go. You need to be with your family. It was a tough decision. So he wasn't able to be there for that final game. How tough was that for you?
It was. You know, I don't look at it as, you know, he was, you know, walking away from us. You know, we sat and we spoke for a few minutes. I mean, Coach Allo was a man of few words. You know, he was pretty much like, listen, you have this under wraps. You know, I need to be with my family. And I totally understood, you know, even being a 17-year-old kid, you know, you know, we shed a few tears. We said a few things to each other in a personal matter, but you know, we had a close relationship, Coach Allo and I, and you know, he gave me the confidence to say, you know what, I'm going to pass it off to you. This is your game, and he goes, I have no doubt you're going to succeed. And he goes, you did a lot this year, and he was thankful. And he said he really enjoyed it, and he said he enjoyed it just as much as some of the other state championship teams that he coached, which, you know, I thought was moving and special. And I just knew, even when they kicked the field goal late in the game, I still knew we were going to win that game. You know, as strange as that sounds, you know, people are like, oh, you know, come on, you're saying it now because you won. No, I believed wholeheartedly. I remember coming off to the sidelines, and Coach Leno, you know, in tears, flipping out, saying, they do it to us every year. I said, Coach, there's still a minute 50 left in the game. We're going to win this. And he looked at me, and he hugged me, and we did. We went right down the field and scored.
Right. And we're going to talk about that game, but what about the letter that Coach Alou wrote? That was an emotional letter. You know, Coach DeCenzo was having a tough time getting through it. You know, so, I mean, there were just, like, so many things that season, you know, so many emotion. And it's really like, you know, Charlie said it himself, whenever you have a great season, it's not always great behind the scenes. There's things that happen. You go into that Shelton game, and Shelton doesn't want to have a losing season. They're 4-5, and I remember Coach D'Onofrio said, they gave you a losing season last year. Give them one this year. So there was a lot right. And you guys, I think it would have left a bad taste in your mouth to finish your final game with a loss and go 6-4. I think you needed to get that 7th win and beat Shelton. Talk about that game.
Yeah, I remember after warm-ups we came back in, and I knew it was coming. You know, Coach Asenzo, when he finally had the letter, you know, I mean, Coach Allo brought up all the points of throughout that whole season, and I don't think there was one dry eye in that whole place. But in respect, there was also a lot of intensity. I think that letter, I think, typified that what we needed to do. Like, there's no way. I don't care what happens. And I even, you know, even given the speech after that, when we were about to go on the field, you know, we said, no matter what happens, this is going to be a 4-quarter game, and we're going to come up victorious no matter what happens today. We're not losing, you know, and everyone bought into it, and especially at halftime. It was only 7-7.5, and they scored late in the game and kicked the field goal on us. And again, there was never a look of concern. It was probably the second time when you look around, everyone in the huddle, and everyone knew that we were about to do something special. And we did. We went right down the field. I think, you know, I ran like a 25-yard run, and then George had a nice screen run, and then Tilke threw the pass to the pocket to catch it.
And what a great catch.
What a great catch. Too. I didn't even think he caught it. I thought it was intercepted at first. And then all of a sudden you see him pull up the ball, and I look over at Coach Noah, and he fell on his back. He couldn't. We couldn't believe it, but we still had to hold on to him. We scored too quick, and this is the ironic thing about it. Now we're all excited. We're like, okay, now we're up, and Coach Sendo's not even. excited, saying, "Guys, there's still time left. You know, we got to play defense."
I don't
now.
think Charlie ever relaxed until the final tip.
Until the final, but until Dave Bozzato got the interception with like 30 seconds left, and then we were able to run the clock out. But
and talk about that, Dave. Let me ask you this: a couple of things. I know for you, because you're a competitor, you would have liked to be a state champion. But when you looked back at that game and you looked back at that whole season, did you feel like it was a great season? Because I think most people did. You know, if you talk to Oko, you talk to Charlie DeCenzo, they would say that was one of their most enjoyable teams. And it was a 7-3 team, but it was a team that had so many things going against it.
Sure. You know, you look back and you say, well, you know, we could have went undefeated. We could have, you know, had maybe one loss. But yeah, I mean, we overachieved. There's no doubt. I mean, in the beginning of the season, we were projected to go 2-8.
Right.
You know, so to finish it 7-3, the 3 games we lost, we maybe should have won, but we were competitive in every game, and every team that we played at the end respected us. I remember Coach Adazio coming up at the All Whoosy dinner, you know, saying, you know, out of all the games we played, that was the toughest game we played all year. And this is coming from the #1 team in the state, you know, and you know, he wished us well, and he said it. He goes, we honestly thought we were going to come in and win by 3 or 4 touchdowns. He goes, but you guys are a typical Derby team. He goes, you know, I've seen it in the past, and I knew it at halftime, you know. So yeah, that was great to hear too.
Right. And how did you feel getting on the bus? I mean, your high school career was coming to an end. You loved football. I mean, but how did you feel sitting on that bus? I mean, were you on cloud 9? I mean, did you feel
exhausted?
Awesome? Yeah.
It was definitely exhausted. You know, I think, you know, and not just exhausted from the game itself. I think just from the whole season. You know,
were you able to enjoy that season or not till it ended?
Not to be honest with you, Mike. Not until I was embraced by friends and family coming off the field, and then spending that time on the bus, and then spending the last moments in the locker room with the coaches and the rest of the team. You know, be able to address the team and thanking everyone. Yeah, that was the only time I ever really enjoyed that season.
And you know, you get goosebumps because Coach DeCenzo, after you guys had just won that game, he's crying like crazy, and he was so appreciative of what you guys did to turn that year around and get them back to a winning season. Something that's unique that he did, he brought all the parents and the cheerleaders, everybody in the locker room, and it just seemed like it was a family, you know, up there. How did that feel for you, seeing everybody up there? I mean, were you sad to see it go?
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, it's like you put so much time and effort in something, you know, and then you see that it's at its climax, and then you see it at its end. You know, and you look back, and for him to do that, to make it like a community, it was a community effort. I look, as crazy as that sounds, you know, there was a lot of people behind the scenes that helped us throughout the year, and you know, through fundraising, you know, through you know, pep rally, everything. You name it, they, you know, the Sparrows were involved. You know, just so many people outside the box who helped us. And to see it all come to fruition and has gone as well as it did, you know, we still look back as, you know, as competitive as Ron and I were, Leno. We always look back and say, you know, just those couple plays. If we had those, you know, we could have been 9-1. But then you know, you look at like the '87 team. You know, these guys. I can only imagine how those guys felt. It's almost like, do you really want it to be 9-1 and lose, you know, by 2 plays and possibly undefeated? You know, that's a forgotten team. You know, you look back and you say, no. You know, I look back and I don't regret anything of that year.
Right.
You know.
So, in the locker room, Coach DeCenzo announces the players who make All Whoosy. It's yourself, George Hay, Dave Bozzato, and Claudio Mendez, who was the surprise.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he wasn't really like your typical offensive tackle.
No.
But he hit like a 300-pounder.
He did.
But what was the feeling like for you? Because I don't think you're about individual stats, but it had to be a great feeling to know you made All Whoosy.
It was. You know, I look back and I think coming into the season, you know, towards the end of the season, you think, you know, do you have an all-state year? I kind of knew I was never going to get all-state. You know, I look back of what, you know, my brother did. You know, my brother led the state in touchdowns. Then, you know, at that time, Joe Martin led the state in interceptions.
And neither made all-state.
None of them, those 2 don't even make all-state. And I couldn't believe it. So I think going into that season, it didn't matter to me. I think we were just focused on the task at hand of just winning each game. You know, it's such a cliche. You say, "Oh, we're just going to take one game at a time." No, that season we literally took every day, each practice, each game, one at a time.
Right, but you know it was unique too, Dave. correct me if I'm wrong, I could be. I think all Valley you might have made it for offense, and you made all area for defense.
For defense.
So it was crazy. So, some thought you were better on offense. Some thought defense, but all area to me is right there with All-State. The register picks it. Did you feel good about that, knowing that you made all area?
I did, which is good. I remember talking with Pop Shortle at one of the, I think it might have been the all area. He spoke at it, and he said he was vying for the All-State to put a utility player. He's like, because if there was one, he goes, you would have been it. He goes, you fit the billing. I think like 2 years later, they ended up putting a utility on an All-State. So that was comforting, especially coming from a guy from Ansonia, saying that. So. That was good to hear from someone like him.
Right. Now, Coach DeCenzo decides to leave with you guys. You were his final class. Number one, how special was that for you to go out with him? But number two, you guys had mentioned before your senior year he was maybe going to leave, and you told him, please don't, we want you to stay. Did you guys try to talk him out of it after you had got out and said, Coach, why don't you try it again and see what you could do? I know he had a conversation with you guys. I believe he took the seniors and said, listen, I'm stepping down, and I want to thank you. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Pretty much, during that off season, we heard that he was thinking about stepping down. So I went to his house, and he was like, the problem is, he's like, I'm taking the principal job. It could be a conflict of interest. If I'm the principal and I stay on as head coach, the Board of Eds may not let it happen. So we decided to write a letter to the Board of Ed, which was read to them, and they understood it. And then obviously we had a meeting with Coach DeCenzo, and he kind of mentioned, guys, this can go either way. If I do step down, thank you. And we were pretty much saying, you're not going to step down. We plan on doing good things this year. And when after everyone left, Coach Sender's like, I didn't want to do this to you. He's like, but it could happen. He goes, but there's just too many question marks. But it all worked out in the end. I think the Board of Ed made the best decision of their life, for the program at that time.
Right.
To have him come back.
Right. And how disappointing was it though when you knew he had to leave, the next year? You weren't going to be playing for him anymore, but still. I'm sure you wanted to see him remain as head coach.
I did, but I think at that time that team was pretty much garnered to do good things. And I think if he was, Coach Sen's always never made it about himself. So I think if he was ever going to step down, that would be the year. I think if the team wasn't going to be that good, I think he might have stayed another year. Because that's how dedicated he was to the program. He was a part of it pretty much since the inception of back in the 60s at that time.
Right.
So, but I think he left it in good hands, and unfortunately, it didn't work out that way the following year.
Right. Dave, talk to me about some of these seniors that you played with. Obviously Dave Bizzato, Claudio Mendez, Rick Kovac, Sean Bittman, George Hay, Mike Massey, Greg Maliska, Dimitri. Talk about these guys and what they meant to you, because really they bought into what the coaches asked of them, and they knew you were the leader, and they listened to you. Talk about those guys.
Yeah, they did. Especially Mike Massey getting hurt, he still stayed on as part of the team.
Yep, came to practice.
He came to every practice, which I probably wouldn't have. But again, Mike's a great guy. He wanted to be a part of it, and he continued to be a part of it until the last game. Same thing with George Hay. He was asked to do a lot that year. He went from playing guard, as you mentioned, to playing tight end. Now you have someone, Dave Bizzato, who didn't play one down his junior year, coming from St. Joe's, didn't play football, and then now he's getting thrust into being our fullback and defensive back. So he stepped up. Same thing with Sean Bittman. He had a great year anchoring the line. He was really the only player with any varsity experience. So he really helped those guys. And again, I can't say enough about Ronnie Leno coming in that year, is putting as much time and effort and bringing in that youth as we talked about to really help that offensive line and helping the special teams. I can't tell you how many plays we made on special teams that year that went unnoticed. That helped us. Same thing with Greg Maliska. He was hurt. He was another player that was hurt. Didn't play at all that year, but still stayed on. Tried to practice. He wanted to be a part of it. Same thing with Dimitri Anufriavis. I'm still friends with him. He was another player. Didn't play any varsity. And here he was. He played nose guard for us and had a tremendous season.
Right.
And I can't say enough about Claudio Mendez.
Yes.
This was a guy who never played. I mean, they moved
Right.
him to so many different positions, and now he comes in at left tackle and makes all Hoosie that year.
Right.
So yeah, those guys. I told them I couldn't tell you how thankful I was for the time and effort those guys put in.
Right.
That
And
season.
Dave, I'm sure you were friends with some of them. Maybe some of them, sometimes it happens, acquaintances. Maybe not as close as with others. But the most important thing is you guys all got along on the field, because it wouldn't have happened if it didn't. Let me ask you this: what was the most rewarding thing to you as an athlete? Whether it's football, baseball. I know winning the championships are great, but what did you get out of it the most?
I think the most is how it carries on through life. Playing football, you go through those ups and downs, and it's how you handle that adversity, and that carries on through the rest of my life. Knowing there was times, in the past, 10 years, where things weren't going right. They weren't going well. And I think, playing a sport such as football, it enables you to get past those trials and tribulations. Right. And without that, and without the people and the mentors I had in my life, and I know I mentioned them several times throughout this interview, Barry McDermott, Nick Rizzio, Jimmy Mascolo, Charlie DeCenzo, Ronnie Lanos, and Tommy D'Onofrio, so many people that have influenced my life, and I couldn't have been more thankful.
Right. As a father now, Dave, and you've got a young son, I mean, what is the only thing you would ask of him when he competes?
It's the one thing I ask him to always do is to be a team player. The personal accolades, that drives me nuts. When you always see a player sticking his hands up in the air, always thinking it's about them, when you got 10 other guys out there.
Right.
You're not getting there without the rest of the guys that surround you.
Right.
So if that's one thing I can teach him, is that.
Well, Dave, this has been a pleasure. It's hard to believe it went by so quick, but
thanks, Mike.
I just want to let you know, you were one of the best athletes in Derby, and for somebody who was on that team as a sophomore and just saw the way you led that team, your play speaks for itself, but I always remember the great leader that you were on that team and how you made it easy for people like us who were sophomores, and I really do applaud you on a great career, and I thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
So there you have it, folks. It's never easy following in the footsteps of an all-state brother like John Anroman. David Anroman was a great athlete, but at the same time, David Anroman was an even better leader. After a losing season for the first time in 27 years, Dave Anroman was one of the few with varsity experience. He had to come out there and he had to be the captain and be the leader of the team, and he did just that. He didn't care about individual goals. He only cared about one thing, the success of the team. That 7-3 team may be forgotten a lot because nowadays it's all about championships, but nobody could forget what they did that year, and it all started with David Anroman. When you talk about legends, champions, warriors, dust off the word for David Anroman. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Kenichi, and welcome to Hometown Heroes.
Rivalry was big during that era because the Ansoni always had good teams. And for some odd reason, even when the Ansoni was good, Derby they beat them.
Right.
It was crazy.
Being who I was, Jack's oldest son, at that time, young kid, growing up in that program and watching, it was something that I wanted to do.
And that's when Eddie and I hooked up, and I tell you, I didn't realize it was 24 years that we, when you look back at it.
But I always took a back seat being the basketball coach, and football did their thing because I could see right from the beginning that the people in town were in love with their football program.
Right.
So and plus Boots Jarvis was then the athletic director and the football coach when I started.
So
when you came onto the staff, you know, he told you, listen, you're coming in as number 6 coach. If someone leaves, you're going to become number 5,
Right.
number 4, number 3. And I was coach number 3 because it was Lou, Frank, and myself.